Shabbat Shalom, and this is 10 minutes of Torah. Not 7 full days of Chagim, of holidays, and not the 8th month of the year, but 10 minutes of Torah. Well, we've just finished, indeed, 7 extra days of holidays. And they're holidays. So for the most part, with maybe the exception of Yom Kippur, they were fun. But you remember, I hope, that I spoke about making Yom Kippur your favorite holiday. I don't know if I convinced you of that, but maybe there's some fun there too. But we had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, 2 days of Sukkot, and 2 days of Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. That was 7 days, and believe it or not, this coming week we are about to start the 8th month because Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month. That's a whole calendar explanation, which some of which I have done in the past, but it is certainly the 8th month coming up now, not the 2nd month. Well, we have all of those things, but most importantly, we begin again the Torah. And to me, that is just such a wonderful, exciting moment when we begin the Torah again. There is something, I think, that is almost, there's no words to describe the idea that in Judaism, as soon as we end something, we begin something. We have that sometimes in English in a much less powerful way. People will say, when one door closes, another opens. Okay, that's a nice way to put it, but I think the idea that when we finish 1 year of Torah study, another year of Torah study opens. And of course, the book of Breshit, of Genesis, it just contains such wonderful religious ideas and writing, and there's really so much in there. And so I'm always very excited when we return, as we do this week, to the very beginning of the Torah. Now, Breshit, kind of move through the first couple of Torah portions very quickly because Breshit has nothing to do directly with the Jewish people. Breshit is about the creation of the world. It's about the first human beings, but not yet about Judaism. That won't be for 2 more weeks, but we'll worry about that at the time. Breshit, of course, begins at the beginning. Perhaps one of the most famous verses or English translations are the words, "In the beginning, God created." What's interesting, of course, is ever since those words were translated, ever since the word Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created, were translated, there has been debates among academics and scholarly people as to actually what do those words mean. As a matter of fact, in the Torah translation that we use, which is from the Jewish Publication Society. It's called the New Jewish Publication Society, even though it is, some 50, 60 years old by now, but there was an older one, which is more than 100 years old. And the way that begins is not in the beginning God created, but when God began to create heaven and earth. Now, it just shows you how a translation is also a commentary. We're not always exactly sure how to translate certain words. Similarly, right? I mean, is it so different to say, "In the beginning God created," or "when God began to create heaven and earth"? They are quite similar, and yet they are also quite different. Because when you say "in the beginning God began," when you say "in the beginning God created," that indicates that this is the beginning of everything. In the beginning. The words in the new translation, which isn't, as I said, not so new, the words translated as "when God began to create" has a very different implication. When God began to create indicates that there is something there for God to create with. In other words, there's existence, there is God at least, and God continues on from there. So the difference is this the very beginning of everything, or is it just the beginning of the creation of our world? Well, different ways to understand it, different translations. Of course, we have the description of creation in 7 days, and then that is followed by, in chapter 2, a description of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. Once Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, well, this week's Parsha doesn't end there. The first thing they do is they have a child. Cain is his name, Cain. I kind of like that, but not what he does. And then, of course, having left the garden, it talks about Cain and Abel, and eventually takes us from that moment through 10 generations and ends with the person coming up next week, Noah. Well, okay, there's a lot going on, and as I said, a lot one could talk about, but I want to think for a moment about the difference between chapter 1 and chapter 2. When I say chapter 2, actually chapter 1 in that sense goes over a bit into chapter 2. That is the theme of creation in six days, or including Shabbat, continues on through the very beginning of chapter 2, the first few verses, which we know well because those are the verses we use in Kiddush. You know, when the heaven and earth were finished, Vayachulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz. Those are the words we use. Okay, so we've got creation in 6 days or 7 days, if you prefer that Shabbat is a creation. And then we have Adam and Eve. Now, traditionally, we kind of looked at Adam and Eve and their creation as being what went on the 6th day. But it doesn't say that actually at all in the Torah. It doesn't say that on the 6th day, this is what happened with creation. It just has 7 days of creation, and then it focuses in on Adam and Eve. Now, what is the difference between creation in 6 or 7 days and Adam and Eve? First of all, they are making very different points about God's relationship to the world and to us. When you think about it, God did not need 7 days to create the world. If God could create the world in 7 days, God could have created the world in 1 day. So therefore, there must be a reason why God took 7 days to create the world. And the same is true with Adam and Eve. Why do we need to bring two human beings into this picture? What is that purpose? What does that teach us? So I think that each part teaches something different, and I can only go into a few of those teachings. First, creation in 7 days shows a certain orderliness to the universe. And that's, of course, how we feel. That's what we see. That's what we experience. We know winter, spring, summer, and fall. All you've got to do is call. No, that's from a different piece, those who may recall that Carole King tune. But winter, spring, summer, and fall, they always go in that direction. It's guaranteed. There is an order to the universe. Not only that, but this order is something which has a purpose to it. We start out at the very beginning with the creation of light, and we end up with the who is supposed to bring light to the world? Human beings. So we have that sort of a scientific way of understanding the world. Not true with Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve talks about our personal relationship with God. And so Adam and Eve, there is already discussion about God commanding them not to eat of one of the trees in the middle of the garden, that is the tree of knowledge, and human beings deciding not to follow that commandment. It is not about the science, if you will, of creation. It's about our relationship to God. And so that's how the Torah begins. It tells us that this world is created by God. We don't need to worry about the science or the biology of it, but there's an order to the world, and God made those decisions, or the Torah explains that to us to tell us, yes, there is order in life. But also, a part of creation is our being able to have a relationship with God. And that starts with Adam and Eve and continues on with us. Well, this has been our first 10 minutes of Torah of the new year. Not 7 days of holidays. I don't know about you. I love the holidays, but 7 days is enough. And not the 8th month. That'll come next week. We look forward to it. But 10 minutes of Torah. Shabbat Shalom.